Hello and welcome, everyone. Happy Wednesday. As people are filing in and you're getting settled, feel free to say hello in the chat and let us know what organization you're with and where you're joining us from today. We have a big group scheduled with us today, so it's always great to see the variety of organizations who join us on these webinars. This month, our webinar is titled Mission Retainable, Data-Backed Strategies to Keep Donors Coming Back Year After Year. So before we jump in, you can go to the next slide. For those of you who are new to Fundraising Academy, we focus on helping fundraisers at every stage build stronger, more meaningful donor relationships through our cause-selling approach. Everything we do here is about giving you practical strategies that you can use straight away to deepen connection and drive your impact. My name is DeAndra Hicks, and I will be your moderator for today's session. I have over 25 years of experience in fundraising and marketing at organizations such as World Wildlife Fund, Ocean Conservancy, UC Santa Cruz, and Breakthrough Silicon Valley. And now I'm proud to call Fundraising Academy home. One struggle I know that all of us fundraisers have, which is the topic of today's webinar, is retaining donors. I hope you enjoy this jam-packed presentation, and I'm confident that you're going to walk away with some valuable insights that you can apply straight away. Before we get started, just a couple of quick notes. We'll have time for Q&A at the end, but we will also answer questions as we go, so feel free to drop in your questions into the chat. I'm proud to introduce to you our presenter for today's session, Kirsten Wantland from our partner Bloomerang, which is a cloud-based giving platform for nonprofits, for those of you who don't know Bloomerang yet. Kirsten is a principal industry strategist at Bloomerang, and she helps educate organizations on best practices for data storage, workflows, donor cultivation, all of this to help amplify fundraising success at organizations. We're so fortunate to have her with us today. And now let's get started on why we're all here. So, Kirsten, over to you.
Thank you so much for the intro. I'm glad to be here today, and I hope you guys all get some good takeaways for today's webinar that you can apply immediately as soon as you even leave this room. So take notes, ask questions. I do love to kind of interact and make sure you have that answer to anything that you're kind of pondering on throughout the webinar today. So do please ask those questions and engage. All right, so to talk a little bit about what we're going to cover, we're going to talk about the donor trend analysis and kind of what's going on in the sector. We're going to review some fundraising effectiveness project reports and some of those stats so we can talk about the takeaways. We're going to talk about our current challenges with retention. And then we're going to talk about Bloomerang's research report called Mission Retainable. And that will uncover a lot of insights into how we can kind of curb some of those trends that are happening in the sector. And then we're going to wrap that up with some actionable next steps and a case study at the end. So again, please ask those questions. Don't be shy about that, and we'll get rolling here. So we'll start by talking about this donor retention landscape. So according to the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, the number of donors has declined slightly over the past couple of years, especially since the spike in giving around the pandemic. But something important is happening beneath that trend. The total dollars are actually increasing. So when we look at different segments going through this slide here, overall donors are the numbers coming down. New donors, we're seeing a little bit of fluctuation over the last couple of years, but again, in 2024, that most recent, it's also down. Our recaptured is also down, but then our donations in 2024 are up. So what that's actually telling us is donors are still generous and their giving is being concentrated among smaller groups of individuals. We'll look at some of the breakdown of those levels of donors that are giving, but the challenge isn't their generosity, it's keeping those donors connected over time. So this is where your retention strategy becomes super important. Donors want that connection. They want to support your meaningful work. Our opportunity as fundraisers is making sure they feel connected to the impact they're creating. So let's talk about that donor mix. So when we look at fundraising effectiveness project, it's one of the most comprehensive studies in the industry. They have categorizations: micro, small, mid-size, major, and those super-sized donors. So we'll look at some of the stats around that donor mix and how it's changed in the last year since that quarter for 2024 report. So we're looking at the entirety of 2024. So our micro donors are down, our small donors are down, mid-size are down, major are down, and our supersize are down. Now, the interesting part is looking at the mix of donors that are in this, right? So when we think of those micro level donors, oftentimes as fundraisers, we always want to focus on those higher level, the donors that are giving us a lot of, I always call them the Wheel of Fortune checks, right? The really, really big ones. But the micro donors actually make up more than half of the total donors in the most recent report. So that's a really, really big piece of that pie. Now, um, the donors get overlooked, but collectively they represent a huge portion of that donor base. So even when we look at that micro and that small level, I want you to think about those cultivation strategies we have towards those smaller subsets of groups. Now, let's look at total giving. As we can see, we've got 1981 up until that 2024. It's really just trended over time. And this is through crisis, through any humanitarian issues that we're kind of experiencing as a collective here, global events, right? That charitable giving continues to grow. And it does tell us something powerful about the nonprofit sector. Like, people fundamentally want to help and want to contribute no matter what's going on. So that's a bit of a bright spot in a lot of these current trends. So the opportunity is making sure that we give them the right places to connect and build those lasting relationships. So I've got a question for everybody here. Do you know your donor retention rate? And if you don't know how to calculate it, we'll go over it in just a moment. But if you do know that donor retention rate, I would love if you can throw that in the chat. You can maybe put your last completed year or your year to date if you feel comfortable kind of sharing what that is now. But I'd love to hear anybody's donor retention rate here. Now, to calculate your donor retention rate, we'll go right into that. So if you don't have it offhand, then you can share it later. Your donor retention rate, we're going to look at two time frames. So how many donors you have in a certain year and how many of them gave again in another year, right? In that year that follows that sequentially. I almost said consequentially, but sequentially is the right word, right? So we're looking at all of our donors in year one. Let's say we had 100 donors last year. If out of those 100 donors, 50 of them gave again this year, that's a 50% donor retention rate. So if anyone would like to share, I'd love to hear that in there. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, that's how we're calculating that donor retention rate. And it's a simple metric, but it tells a powerful story about like how well donors feel connected to your organization. More often than not, when donors give, it's in a moment of inspiration. They're showing up for a crisis, right? So it's the work that we do in terms of retention strategies, building the relationship to make sure they continue supporting and feeling that inspiration long term. All right.
So
So
we
now let's, oh yeah, go ahead.
Kirsten, we have some retention rates coming in, and
Oh,
obviously
yes.
they vary from the 20s, 30s up into the 40s a little bit.
Very
Um,
cool.
there is one question. When you talk about donors, are you talking just about individual donors here, or are you
Yeah.
including
So for these
foundation?
metrics, I'm gonna talk about specifically individual donors. Excellent question. Good clarification. I'll add in for next time I give this one. But thank you guys for sharing that, right? I see Karen just shared 47%. We don't expect a lot of guests to become donors, right? 34%, 15% so far year to date in 2026. The important fact is like understanding this metric and how we're tracking that over time, right? And as you see how that number tends to fluctuate, what is within our control, right? How are we communicating to those different groups? Are we segmenting based on behavior? So there's a lot of different bits as you're kind of thinking about this retention. And we'll talk about some national averages here so you can benchmark your organization's performance against what's kind of standard in the industry. So we'll talk about that in just a minute, but thank you guys for sharing that. And as a fundraising consultant, I always talk to organizations. They're like, what should my retention be, right? The best answer to that is progressing. It's not a number, right? Of course, you want to hit those industry benchmarks at some point, but if you're seeing some progress, every organization's different. That's kind of the biggest goal here. So let's talk about some average donor retention rates. So we've got 19.4% for first-time donors, 42.9 for average donors, and I'll talk about that average definition, right? And then 69.2% for repeat donors. So do we see any sort of trend on this slide? One thing I'm going to highlight here is that time equivalence is going to go up with that retention rate. So when we're looking at that first time donor retention rate of 19.4 cents, what we're actually seeing is every 2 out of 10 donors will come back if they're first time, right? So how much are we investing in that particular segment? And again, it could be events, it could be a lot of different contributors to that metric, but this is kind of that industry baseline, and it hasn't really fluctuated too much in the last couple of decades. Now, our average donors, we're going to look at all donors, no matter if they're repeat, no matter if they're first time, no matter if whatever they are, they give kind of here and there over the years, right? So when we look at that retention rate, think of that average donor retention rate as just year over year. This is what we can expect no matter what their giving pattern is. Now, our repeat donors, which Fundraising Effectiveness Project will categorize as donors who have given more than 2 consecutive years. So that retention rate skyrockets, right? It's almost 70%. So once we can get donors giving for 2 years, so we retain them, then they're really, really likely to keep coming back. We've kind of made it over that hardest part of the relationship battle. So we'll look a little bit more at the types of donors and what some of those characteristics can be. But understanding these differences are really going to allow you as an organization to build more intentional engagement strategies so we can continue to see those averages increase as a sector. All right, just for all the visual folk out there, we have average donor retention rates. We've got the last 4 years since the pandemic, right? So they've fluctuated a little bit, 37.8, 42.6, 42%, 42.9. So we can call this a bit of a gain in the last quarterly annual report. So we're hoping this trend continues here. And now our first time donor retention rate. So we talked again, this is the lowest stat group. So they're the most likely group to turn. Again, we're kind of relying on their one moment of inspiration to kind of just carry through and have them continue to fall in love with your organization and support you from now until forever. Oftentimes that doesn't happen. It may be events. They may just decide to give impulsively, right? It may be a peer-to-peer campaign where I'm giving you X amount of dollars because DeAndra knows you, right? So we're talking about that relationship with first-time donors. And when we think about our strategies, right, we kind of have 2 options when we have a broader strategy in fundraising. We have a retention-based strategy and we have an acquisition-based strategy, right? So when we think about this, your acquisition costs are much higher than retaining those donors that have already given and shown that interest in your organization. So I want you to think about that as we're kind of tracking those key indicators for performance. Your acquisition cost is going to be a lot higher. Okay. Now, our repeat donor retention rates, right? Once we get that second gift, that second year of retention, we're in pretty good shape. Those retention rates improve significantly. So that's typically that turning point where the donor starts seeing themselves as part of your mission. And one of the most powerful strategies nonprofits can implement is getting donors to that second gift. So Does anyone in this webinar currently track their first-time donor retention? That's one question I'm really curious about for you guys. If you do, feel free and share that one in there, specifically your first-time donor retention. And if you do have any particular strategies that work for you for converting, right, to building those longer relationships, feel free to share that in your chat for your community members as well. All right, so just to kind of wrap up some of those key takeaways from the sector, from some of the reports, your cost per acquisition is a lot higher. It's that initial donation amount is going to be 2 to 3 times what that cost will be. And when we are considering this, your retention or your renewal response rates, right? 20 to 30% higher than your acquisition response rate. So it's easier and cheaper for your organization to retain those donors already than it is to continuously acquire those new donors. So Bloomerang ran a mission retainable research. And what this research comprises of is tons of responses from more than 1,000 donors, more than 300 fundraisers. And what we were looking at here is understanding how our fundraisers think versus what our donors are actually asking for. So we want to help uncover any of those gaps that exist there so we can rectify them and make sure that we're serving our donor community in the best way possible. All right, so our donor perspective on retention. So our donors, they feel disconnected and unsure of that impact, hence they churn. Churn is one of those words for me. 24% cite a lack of transparency. And that could be related to the impact that they're causing, how their funds are being spent and utilized within the organization. And repeated appeals without meaningful updates can leave donors feeling a bit undervalued, like we don't really care about that relationship and like they're just there to kind of write those checks, right? It feels very transactional. Now, 87% of donors have cited in this study that reasons why they have stopped supporting an organization is due to financial strain. So obviously we can't control that aspect, but we can help them feel more a part of that mission. All right. This is one of the interesting parts. We surveyed more than 1,000 donors and we asked them, why did you give more than once to an organization? So 63% of the donors said the mission or the nonprofit is important to me. So let's consider how much we're sharing our mission statement with organizations. Maybe we're writing them in our appeals, we're putting them on our campaign pages. The majority of organizations are saying this is why, or of donors are saying this is why I'm continuing to give to this organization. It's because that mission is so important. 50% said, I believe my donation is making a significant impact. So no matter what, they believe that their money is going to the right place. It's going to a justifiable cause. 27% said it's easier to break up a donation into smaller ones throughout the year. So that's simply convenience, right? What options are we offering them for convenience? Are we allowing them to do recurring gifts so they can budget a little bit more appropriately? Are we allowing them to use digital wallet methods so we're making it really easy and reducing the friction for them to give? And then 8% said, I received a personal thank you note for my previous gifts. So they really got that appreciation exchange. And they're saying, I'm going to give again because DeAndra really, really appreciated this gift to my organization. All right. How do you prefer to hear from the causes or nonprofits you support? This one was actually kind of surprising for me. It makes sense, but it was a little surprising. So we'll talk about number one, email, right? We get a lot of email in our inboxes, but it is the most tangible way and the fastest way we can get those updates on a regular basis. And we can really kind of show up consistently for our donors in that inbox. We can tell them what's going on a regular basis with like a newsletter or send up any crisis updates if we're running a campaign that's kind of urgent. We really have the ability to communicate very well with our donors via email. Again, as long as we're kind of collecting that information and they're opting in. Now, the second option was social media. This was the one that was surprising, and I think we can see this a little bit with the generational shift. Um, it's undoubted that a lot of our society spends a lot of time on social media. So what Mission Retainable is telling us here is that our donors want to see it in places they already are. They want to be updated in those places that they're already spending a lot of time about the causes that they're caring about. They want to see those changes there. Text messages. This was also pretty important. It showed up as number three when they were ranking those options. DeAndra, you look like you're a little shocked about that text message one.
I am. This is amazing to me. I've worked in at huge organizations, and you would have not seen this 10 years ago or 5 years ago. Like, where's that dreaded direct mail? I'm thinking that's probably coming in six, maybe, but it's yeah, it's surprising to me that the not so much email, but the social media and text is so high up on the list.
Yeah. Well, think about your text messages too, right? So when you're texting someone, who am I typically texting? 99% of the time, it's my best friends from college, it's my husband, or it's my mother-in-law, right? It's always going to be people that are important to you, and you're talking about things that are important to you. And if they really do prefer that method, right, that is something, a piece of technology that we can start to leverage. We see a lot of software coming out with these options where we can text a number and then we automatically get a donation form so I can contribute. We're seeing that a lot in like live events. DeAndre, what do you think about that aspect of texting?
Yeah, for sure. That doing it during events, I've seen that work great in raising money for sure. We do have a question from Chris in the chat. Do you
Awesome.
happen to know the demographics of the 1,000 donors that were surveyed?
Ooh,
Do
I
they
think they do break the
gender?
demographics down in the full report, which I'll have a QR code for you at the end. So I do think they kind of break down those demographics and show you different age groups of who's answering, whether it's men or women. So I think you can look at the full Mission Retainable report for all of your information.
Great.
I should have probably added a little breakdown. I'll do that next time for sure. Awesome. Let's talk about number four. Postal mail, right? There's that direct mail, so a little bit higher than number six option. They do like getting those updates via mail. Typically, it's going to be those appeals, right? They're sending a lot of information. They're also asking for that contribution back with a remit envelope. Now, in number five is going to be in-person events. And our six is going to be phone calls. So this one was surprising for me because another piece of research that's kind of out in the sector is if a first-time donor receives a phone call in the first 24 to 48 hours, right, they're more than four times as likely to give another transaction. So that is one that kind of surprised me and may be more effective for that subset of first-time donors. But this is our overall donor expectation here on how they prefer to be contacted.
And I wonder if donors are reading in phone calls as telemarketing, maybe,
I mean,
not
yeah,
kind of the one-to-one like personal phone
yeah.
calls.
Yeah, I think the phonathons have made a lasting impression, right? No matter whether you think that's positive or not, but when we look at phonathons, right, the objective of that is we're running a campaign, it's usually a day or two where we're saying, "Hey Deandra, I'd love for you to support my mission. It's going to XYZ cause," right? And so donors don't expect simply an update via phone call. They feel that that update is going to be an ask, right? And then they may not always be in the position to fulfill that ask. But that's even more encouragement, in my opinion, to start making those phone calls and be like, DeAndre, I just want to let you know that your donation you gave me fed 17 cats and they loved it, right? So just to give you that update, right, it gives you some perspective on their ranking. I think that ranking could change if we see a bit more of that relationship building behavior in that in the phone call method, right? All right. other activities that help donors feel connected. So we're not strictly just talking about how do they prefer to be given, to be giving money or to be contacted, right? So receiving those regular updates about impacts. We talked about that one already. They really love to know what's going on. This is where I encourage a lot of transparency. Oftentimes, if we don't talk about what our organization's hardships are, or talk about the impact that we're creating or the lives that you're changing, right? The donors don't really know how far their dollars are going. So they really love receiving those regular updates and be specific, give them the details, right? Now, 41% volunteer opportunities. That one was ranked a bit higher than I expected it in this one, actually. Um, so I've done some volunteer coordination in the past, and depending on the organization, right, we may or may not have a lot of opportunities for that, but donors really love to volunteer. It's a great aspect where oftentimes we treat those segments as different entirely. We have our donors, we have our volunteers, they don't often crisscross, but there's a lot of overlap potential there. So your donors love to give that time as well. 30% say personal recognition or thank yous. That can be anything from an annual appeal to those personal phone calls we talked about. 26% said attending events. And events are a big part of the nonprofit sector, right? So this shows me that donors would almost prefer and feel that connection stronger by receiving those updates. Now, 23% love the ability to give feedback. They love to say, have you thought about this? Have you taken that idea? They love to feel heard in those conversations. So this is where we have an opportunity for surveys to go to your donor community and you get those responses back. You get to converse with them about their preferences, right? Now let's talk about the big ones. So why donors stop giving? I kind of hinted at this first one before. This one is 87% cite those financial limitations, right? Stuff with the economy changes, their circumstances change. 87% are noting that as financial limitations, which we can't really help. That 12% is lack of trust, right? And that lack of trust can come down to communication. Are we telling them enough? Are we being clear about the impact? Are we publishing an annual report that shows what we did with their dollars? Are we good stewards of their money? Now, 12% lack that transparency about contribution impact, right? So trust and that contribution impact, we can almost separate those here for a minute. Now, that contribution impact, that's like, is my money going towards this particular program or is it going towards supporting XYZ? No matter what that option is, we want to communicate that and let them know how their funds are being used. And then 11% said insufficient. So maybe their appeals are too vague. Maybe that information is not specific and
Oh, just a second, Kirsten, can you hear me? We've lost your audio for a second. So the last couple of
there.
sentences.
There we go.
There, you're back.
Awesome.
You
All
might
right.
you might want to repeat the 11% again. The insufficient information.
Oh no, did I get muted? Oh
Yeah,
no.
you got muted. We lost you. We lost
Oh,
you
whoops. Yeah,
for
okay. So
a
my bad on that. All right. So 11% for the insufficient information. That one, think about as it may be too vague, right? So we may not be telling them what we're using the dollars for at all. We may not be saying, this is the ask amount I need to accomplish this. I call that my cost to cause correlation, right? So if I'm saying, DeAndra, I need you to vaccinate 5 cats. That means donate $75. It's very clear to the donor what they accomplish with those funds. Even again, if you're doing this for unrestricted funds, you're helping that find a way to kind of translate that cost to cause correlation into those amounts so they have a clear impact. All right. So now let's talk about the fundraiser's perspective on donor retention. So the fundraiser says it's difficult to track and tailor retention strategies with donors. So the majority of donors or fundraisers now do operate with a CRM, but only 38% of them even track first-time donor retention rate. So if you are tracking first-time donor retention rate, you're kind of ahead of the curve here. And a good chunk of fundraisers also cite donor fatigue. So when we think about this, most organizations have the tools they need, they just don't have the right strategies. So lastly, many are also reporting limited capacity to personalize, right? So that's where they find that tailored communication strategies can be quite difficult, but that's where we can kind of rely on our technology to do that stuff for us in a really tactful way. So our donors are still getting those personal updates, and we are working very efficiently to cultivate them. All right. Now we're switching here into that fundraiser perspective, right? So fundraisers found these strategies most effective for retention. And 87% says personalized communication. They really believe that when they take that time to personalize communication, it's incredibly effective. 68% say building relational or personal relationships. So 68% really rely on that long-term relationship building skills to say this is going to make an impact for my retention strategy. 59% of fundraisers say demonstrating the impact of donations. So again, talk about that cost to cause correlation, sending annual updates, maybe even reporting on social media to say this is what your dollars have accomplished. They're going to believe that 59% demonstrating the impact of donations is really impactful for retention. We're going to get into our lower tiers here. So offering convenient payment methods. So that's actually a larger chunk than I expected from this report result. 28% of fundraisers said offering this really helps my retention. And think about it, you're just reducing friction on the donor's end to get that money from their bank account to your bank account. So the easier you can make it, the less steps they have to do, the faster that money is going to flow to your organization. Now, 23% said regular engagement through events. So they really like showing up to those events and engaging with the fundraiser. 19% said providing tax receipts promptly. They really believe that does help their retention. If they can get all their ducks in the row and they qualify for those tax exemptions, they're getting them out to their donors. They're being good stewards there. And lastly, that 17% says recognition in publications or events. So that is ranked lowest, which is again interesting when we look at these results, because oftentimes we think that a lot of donors want this recognition. A lot of fundraisers don't believe that's the highest priority. All right. So now let's talk about bridging the gap. So when we compare fundraiser and donor perspectives, we see a couple of clear gaps. The good news is that they are fixable, and when organizations address them, the retention will improve. So donors value regular updates, yet fundraisers struggle to share that impact. 65%, again, of donors value the updates about their impact, but only 36% of nonprofits in our survey say they share those regular impact reports. And we're not just talking about impact reports on an annual basis, right? Think about quarterly or even monthly. Only 36% are saying that they actually share that. So that's a pretty wide gap that can be closed pretty easily just by communicating about that impact more often. Now we have a gap in some payment options. Again, we've talked about this as reducing friction, letting that money flow more easily from the donor's bank account to your organization's bank account. So 83% of fundraisers believe offering multiple payment options will improve that retention. And then 34% of fundraisers reported higher donor engagement with mobile-friendly platforms. So oftentimes when we're thinking about our platforms, how are our donors accessing them and what is that user experience? So think about that user experience as you're going through. If it's difficult to navigate, if it's hard to find, if your donate button's not crystal clear on your homepage, it's difficult to see. Now, 24% of donors prefer digital wallets, while only 3% of fundraisers believe that digital wallets are the preferred payment method of donors, right? So that one is another big gap. So 24% of donors prefer digital wallets. We're talking like Apple Pay, Google Pay, all of those options, right? And only 3% of fundraisers believe that they are the preferred payment method of donors. All right, messaging. Let's talk about some gaps here. So 50% of fundraisers segment messaging based on giving history, interests, or demographic, right? 50%, that's half of our fundraisers. Now, donors are 15% more likely to stay engaged when they receive those personalized updates. So there's an instant way where we can personalize that to what I care about. So this can be based on transaction data, demographic data, right? Whatever this person's contributing to or supporting, email interests, if we're tailoring those and saying, Kirst loves cats, I'm going to send her an update about cats, they're going to be more engaged. Now, 94% here, retention leaders use CRMs and donor insights to craft tailored outreach. This shows that they use CRMs, but only 47% take advantage of those tools to actually tailor. All right. So let's talk about where to start with a donor-centered retention strategy. First, we're going to centralize that constituent data. This doesn't sound like the fun part. It doesn't sound like the relationship building or, the really fun moments of getting those big donations from donors. But the more of your information you have in one place, the more of it you and your system can see, right? You're going to see the behavior. You're going to be able to track aggregately what's going on with your organization, what different segments are exhibiting certain patterns. But that is key to having all that data in one place. And that means maybe taking some extra time and putting those interactions in or connecting an integration. But that is the key to having visibility on what works and what doesn't work for your donors. Now, clean and maintain your donor data. Inaccurate data remains a major hurdle for 30% of fundraisers. Nobody really loves spending that time. I've done more than 300 or 400 audits at Bloomerang for our customers here, helping them maximize what we can clean up, what we can adjust, what duplicates we can resolve, right? The cleaner your data is, the more you're going to be able to trust your data. That's a big aspect where we see that mismatch between I have a CRM, I kind of throw some stuff in it, but I don't know if I can trust it. The key to that is maintaining that clean data. Now, segmenting your donors and personalize the outreach. Now, segmenting donors can be as simple as first-time donors, retained donors, repeat donors, lapsed donors. It can be as simple as looking at those giving patterns. And then it can get as sophisticated as you desire, right? The more you're able to customize and kind of nail down what a donor likes or supports and tailor that communication, the more successful that retention strategy is going to be. And then step 4 is actually promoting recurring giving programs. So this means adding some capability, if you don't have that already on your forms, to have a default on recurring giving option, highlight how monthly gifts provide steady funding for programs. So when we look at the statistics around donors who give on a recurring basis, their retention rates year over year are somewhere between 85% and 90, right? So they're really committed donors. They're giving very regularly. They're helping your organization be more sustainable and move from that kind of hairs on fire experience of fundraising into what can we plan for the long term, because we know we can count on our donors and we know we can count on that funding coming in. All right, so let's talk about a case study. So this is one of my favorite organizations I've worked with over the last couple of years. They do tons of different programs kind of centered around elephant conservation. They do ranger training. They do drone surveillance to make sure that their elephants stay out of conflict areas. You can go watch their elephants on a drone on their website. It's very cool. So this is one of my favorite organizations, and I want to talk about how we've kind of pivoted some of their strategy to being holy cow, what are we working on right now? And we need funding by tomorrow into being a bit more long term. So the goal was to create a donor-centric giving strategy. And first, we did some personalization. So we looked at some of the behaviors where people reading the newsletter, clicking on things, looking for certain things, editing their email interests to say, I care about the Ranger program or I care about the drone surveillance. And again, we're just looking at pattern recognition. And one of the other things we automated on her platform, on Mara's platform, is recognition and awards. So we set up some really cool workflows that said, hey, when DeAndra gets to 5 transactions, send her this awesome email that really congratulates her in that milestone. So we had a lot of really positive and proactive things where we're not just reaching out to the donor and saying, hey, I need some money for this thing I know you care about, right? We're also rewarding them and championing them inside that workflow as well when they're reaching those milestones. So it was really fun to kind of see the reaction of donors to say, holy cow, I gave 5 times. This was awesome, right? And sometimes they were phone calls, sometimes they were emails, but they really got to enjoy that milestone with them. And it felt really important that the fundraiser noticed that about their record, right? So again, we're relying on those clean records, we're seeing the patterns, but there's tons of systems we can set up to automate loyalty rewards or milestone rewards, right? And that becomes sharing in a lot of that joy with the donor. Now, technology, again, I talked a little bit, I jumped the gun a little bit on that with the customizations and the automation of cultivation touch points, but we didn't just do that for like the positive stuff too. We did that as almost a radar, right? To say, well, this group of people hasn't given in the last 9 months, so let's plan some cultivation touch points. Or these people are showing some signs of upgrading, so let's do these 3 things with them, and then we'll secure an upgrade. We'll ask that solicitation. So we had sort of the system doing a lot of that legwork for us, where we set up the parameters, but what we got in return was a to-do list of saying, awesome, you're going to call these 7 donors and say, reward them for this behavior, let them know about their impact, and then that last interaction will be a solicitation. So it really helped with that cultivation pipeline and really helped grow a lot of their metrics, which I will show some of those here in just a moment. Now, that consistent communication, again, we talked about that regular need for impact updates. They do monthly newsletters to different groups depending on what they're supporting. And again, really specific program information. If they hit a milestone in their drone campaign and they needed to replace one, they let their donors know when that milestone was reached. So it's really great to see that transparency, because the more transparent you can be, the more your donors can step in to help. If you haven't looked at some of the COVID research around fundraising, it's very interesting. Organizations that did address they were struggling with the pandemic raised significantly more money than organizations that chose not to address it. So again, we're just talking about that transparency and the honesty and saying, hey, I need help. Can you step in? And then donors are really showing up for them. So we're going to look at some metrics now. I worked with this organization from June of 2023. Their most recent metric meeting was January of 26. So I met with this organization quarterly. And when we look at their donor retention, right, we see I have their first meeting at the top of that metric slide, and then right to the bottom, right, that's kind of where their metric is. Their new normal is in the 50s. Once we adjusted this strategy, we communicated more often and more intentionally. So we're seeing this donor retention. And the funny thing about donor retention percentages is you don't often know, like I could say, awesome, I'm retaining 6 out of 13 donors, right? But just to give you some perspective, this organization has anywhere from 29,000 to 22,000 donors a year, a calendar rolling year, right? So anywhere from 22 to 29,000 donors every single year, individual, unique. So we're talking about really, really big dollar shifts from these percentages. Now, the big goal here was developing that relationship. So, what we focused on instead of acquisition was more of the retention-based strategies, listening to the signals that they were telling us. And we took their average lifetime value from 266 to 428. Now, to explain this metric for you, let's say I have a couple of donors. I've got, let's say, 3 donors. I get $10 from one donor, $20 from another donor, and $30 from another donor, right? The average lifetime value will take the number of donors and then divide all those dollars that were added together. So on average, out of those 3 donor relationships, we get X amount of dollars. So this organization, even though they had a very high volume of donors, they were often small contributors, and then they would fizzle, right? They would just go off and support something else. We focused on deepening that relationship, and that led to more contributions and that higher lifetime value. So now, on average, when they get a brand new donor, the average amount of money we can expect from them is 428 instead of 266. And given we're talking about 2.5 years here of work. So this is a very, very big change for a large, large database. So just want you to show what's possible here when we kind of take those steps. Now, my favorite metrics for this organization are loyalty. So we know retained. Retained is such a popular metric when we think about fundraising metrics in the sector right now. Retained is just, I gave last year and I gave this year. I've retained that donor. But how far do we go beyond that retention? So I track 3-year donor loyalty. So I want to see what donors are giving. They're not just retained, right? They're giving for 3 consecutive years. And this is the number of donors we had that first meeting in June of 23 up until their 3-year loyalty in January of 26, right? So we saw a significant increase in the number of donors that were giving significantly in that time. And same concept, but for 5 years. And this is the one that's so interesting because it has not plateaued yet. I keep waiting and I keep running this metric, and I'm like, we're going to wait for a plateau, but this organization has not historically rewarded their 5-year loyal donors. But keep in mind, they're giving those donors 5 years, 5 rolling years, no matter what the amount. We're not putting an amount. We're looking for that behavior. 2 last bits I want to show you on this slide. What this number is pointing against is I look at their percentage of retained to 5-year donors. So of the donors they retained, 37% of them are giving 5 consecutive rolling years. That is a massive, massive increase in loyalty from the 1 point something percent that this one was, right? So we've really significantly changed what I would call the donor makeup of their retention base. It's not just strictly people we've retained for 1 year. They are people that have had a lot of loyalty with the organization. And then when I look at their 3-year loyal donors, I left that one for the end because it's a big percentage. That's more than 70% of their retained donors, right? So let me talk about that one again. When we say retained, that's last year and this year. Now, of who's been retained this year, 70% of those donors have actually been giving for 3 consecutive years. Okay. So really, really big changes we can see in that donor base. I'll walk you through a couple more stats. We often ask when we make those strategic shifts, especially with large audiences, remember way back in the beginning, we talked about those micro level donors being more than half of the number of donors kind of currently giving. We always kind of ask what happens with major gifts, right? If we take our eye off the ball and we don't focus on major gifts quite as much, if we start diverting some of that attention, what's going to happen with major gifts? This is one fear I really want to dispel because oftentimes your donors that are micro donors, small donors, mid-level donors, they become your major donors. So I pulled 3 sets of metrics we're going to go through here now. And when we look at our 2024 date versus our 2026, Here's the number of donors with $1,000 gift just after that new year. So sometime in quarter 1, right? We're seeing a really, really large uptick there. So we went from 137 to 254, less than 2 years later of that metric, right? So we're getting a ton more donors in that aspect because we were recognizing their behaviors, we're rewarding them for their contributions, we're communicating about that impact. And even this organization, again, their average gift size was kind of small. We saw their lifetime averages, and that's again over the entire commitment with the donor. Their proportion here and their donors with a $5,000 gift also significantly increased. It more than doubled in 2 years, right? Because we're giving more of those donors in the smaller segments the appropriate attention and communication that they desire. So that's really going to translate into building much stronger major gift pipelines. So it seems like we're maybe taking some of that attention away. We're really just diverting it to a little bit earlier in that donor life cycle to build a stronger relationship now. So those gifts come so much easier along the way. Um, cool. Yeah, those are some awesome stats. I love to share those ones. And just a couple of quick other wins, right? I love tracking this metric, especially for organizations who are focusing on retention and longevity. The average number of gifts per donor relationship when we started the program was 257, and when we ended, or most recent, she's still in there, it's 341, right? So we're seeing that shift, and that's per donor relationship. We're looking at all of that historic data. We've got millions of transactions in there to look at. So this is one that moves kind of slow, but it's trending in the right direction. Now, that average revenue gift size, again, we're kind of focusing on the smaller segment, giving them more attention. We kind of worry that will encourage a smaller gift, but it actually ended up raising a lot of those gifts. We're getting a lot more upgrades for that donor or for that organization, and they're just contributing more because they feel closer to that impact. And their email list, right? They really started cultivating. They had much less unsubscribes and people tailoring their email interest to what they actually want to care about or hear about. So that way we can send them that information. So it really just listens and acknowledges that donor. And then lastly here, this was a cool one that I pulled in. So this one was just last summer till now. We really worked on our recurring donation strategy, right? So part of my passion project with working with organizations is helping them be more sustainable. More sustainable is more predictable revenue for an organization. So the average lifespan for an organization in the United States is somewhere between 7 and 10 years. And again, that's probably skewed up by some of those organizations that have been around for a long time. If what you're doing in your community is truly important, we want to give donors the opportunity to kind of show up for the long haul. So we looked at her recurring donation projections. So all of her donors that were giving on a recurring basis, how much did they expect in a single year? Was this 55,000? And then in 6 months, we changed that to 78,000 by encouraging that program, offering that flexibility, showing and communicating why that impact was more sustainable. And then lastly, our recaptured donors. Again, this metric is also from this time period. We saw some of our current donors, we really kept on to our most loyal folks, but we saw some folks lapse in a higher quantity that we wanted to. So we really focused on recapturing some of those donors, and we were able to bring back 400 more in that next time period of measurement. So a lot of really impactful strategies come from focusing on your retention, customizing that communication, and communicating intentionally. All right, so our key takeaways here. Make time for the boring stuff, right? Database cleanup's never fun. Auditing your records is never fun. But if you do it more often, you're going to be able to rely on your database for a lot of awesome insights. Keep a lot of your integrations connected. Make sure your information's flowing from one to another. And again, we talked so much about communicating intentionally and frequently about those impacts. Take that time to truly connect with your donors. The retention is way more impactful than acquisition. And And then I think I meant to put something else here on that last one, but I left that slide there. So we'll, all right, we'll just roll on from that one. So lastly, we talked about the mission retainable full research study, right? So we've got a QR code on your screen. You can download that QR code and sign up for that report so you can read the whole thing, look at the demographics, read all the research studies. There's a lot of really impactful information there. You can also look for the report on Bloomerang's website if you want it to see it on your report or just on your computer as well. So
We've
awesome.
also included a link in the chat for it.
Perfect.
So that helps.
Beautiful. That's awesome. Yeah, I'll leave that QR code up there for just a moment. And DeAndra, we got any questions?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. We have a couple of Bloomerang users who are interested
Awesome.
in getting some of these stats, right, pulled
Yeah.
for their organization. So I'll be
Cool.
sure to pass on their names and contact information to you, Kirsten,
Yeah,
and
awesome.
I'm sure you guys can help them out
Yeah,
with
sounds good.
that. Um, Earlier on, you did talk about how important it is, right, to keep people updated on the impact, right, of their gift, no matter how big or small that
Yeah.
gift might be. But for some small nonprofits, that might be hard, right? If they have smaller staffs, how do we, they might do an annual report. How it might seem overwhelming to have to put out a quarterly report or a monthly
Yeah.
report or
Yeah,
an update.
it's like where do we start,
Where do we
right?
start? So do you have some
Yeah.
tips, some ideas for how small organizations can still update their donors?
Yeah, I do. I do. I think when we hear the words annual report and quarterly report, right, we really expect and we put this expectation in our fundraiser brains that says it needs to be so polished and so perfect, and marketing needs to touch every part of it, and it needs to go through XYZ thing, right? It does not have to be as formal as the full process of doing an annual report, right? This can be a simple email where you're throwing a couple images in. Maybe marketing writes a customer story about it, or like a donor story or something, right? An impact story. That can be pretty informal. So, my advice is give yourself some flexibility on what you expect that to be. And even some of the donors that do prefer different kinds of communication, give them a phone call and say, "Hey, DeAndra, I just want you to know that you supported us last year, and I want to give you an update on where we're at this year. Have a great day." Not all of those interactions need to be solicitations. So I that's my I use the CFD, right? That's my crappy first draft. Oftentimes it's more impactful to get that first draft out to donors and keep them in the loop than it is of saying, well, this is too much for me. They care less about it being so polished and more about it containing the information they want from you. So that's a very, very easy way to kind of get that. Give yourself some leeway. And the other advice is to use AI, right? I'm a decent writer. I'm not a great writer. But when I'm looking at appeals and stuff like that, I might say to an AI tool like Claude or Penny, if you're on Bloomerang's platform, I might say, "Penny, I'm really working on an appeal to this group of people. What do you recommend I do for language, right?" And they can give you some tips, or they can help you draft that, right? So it's not only in one person's corner and responsibility. So that's my best advice is kind of lean into the messiness that is nonprofit sector work.
For sure. And I'll just throw in a couple of ideas too. A lot of us will write, large impact reports for a major donor, for example. Well, take out a couple of sentences and plop it in an email to your lower dollar donors. It doesn't have to be the full, 10-page impact report that you might send
Mhm.
to a major donor. Or if you're at a project site, right? Take a quick video with your phone. You don't need a video team to come in, right?
Mhm.
Take a quick video with your phone and send it to folks who you have um, cell phones for and say, hey, just wanted to update you. We're on the road. We're at this school. We're meeting with kids. We're spaying animal, whatever you're doing, right? Or record yourself just quickly doing an update, post it on social media. It doesn't have to be fancy. You don't have to spend a lot of money or a lot of time in doing some of the, and it doesn't have to be long and in depth, right? To show people that the impact of their generosity is really making a difference. So
Mhm.
anyway, just wanted to throw those out.
That's awesome. Love it.
Do we have any other questions for Kirsten for retention? This has been great. You've shared so many great insights and statistics and ideas I think that this group can think about as they go back and sit at their desk and pull up their database and figure out who they need to contact and impact and update next. So thank you so much for your time. I think we have a couple um, of last slides for the group. Um, Kirsten and I both want to keep the conversation going, so feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. Those QR codes for each of our LinkedIn profiles are below, as well as Fundraising Academy is on LinkedIn. I'm sure Bloomerang is as well. You can also join our email list if you're not a part of our community yet, and we'll let you know about our upcoming webinars. We have they're free, you know, because you registered for this one. We have them every month. So we want to stay in touch. And speaking of free, we have our online learning portal. All you have to do to register is give us your email address, and you can use that QR code, and we'll put the link for the portal also in the chat. Um, on the online learning portal, you will be able to access on demand any of our webinars. We have over 40 of them now, probably 45 since I've put this graphic together. Of all of our monthly webinars, and they will include not only the recording, but also the slide deck from the presentation. We also do a monthly blog. We have resources, worksheets, donor conversation questions, all at no cost. So if you're not a portal user yet, I encourage you to join us there. And here is a little sneak peek at our next webinar for April. If you are thinking about making a career move, this webinar is going to help you navigate that change and discover ways in which you can help lead yourself through that change. We all know that change is hard. So you will leave with a framework for aligning your values and strengths with future opportunities. You'll get greater clarity about your next professional move and concrete steps to move forward with confidence. So we hope to see you there, and that QR code is there to register now. And again, there's a link in the chat. And I think that's it. Thank you all for joining us today, for your time and for your participation. A special thank you to our presenter, Kirsten from Bloomerang, for being with us today. To help us continue to improve our monthly webinar series and ensure that we're providing value to the participants, please take a few minutes to complete our survey that's going to appear on your screen at the end of the webinar. So thanks again. Do you have any departing thoughts, Kirsten?
No, just thanks for having me. Yeah, and I'm so curious. Please reach out on LinkedIn if you guys do end up tracking some of these metrics or have any other questions lasting after today's call. So thank you so much for having me.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day.